Tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai, hara mai, welcome to our first University of Auckland Early Childhood Seminar for 2026. We'll begin our time together with karakia, me inui tātou. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa pōnamu te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou i te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou i a tātou katoa. Haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Thank you for joining us for today's presentation by a panel of experienced and emerging researchers who will be discussing from emerging to established to discuss their journeys from research to publication, where they started, what has worked well, and what they've learned along the way. Associate Professor Maria Cooper from Waipapa Taumata Rau, the University of Auckland, will be facilitating the panel, which includes Dr. Raella Kahuroa from Te Whare Wānanga o Waikato, the University of Waikato, Dr. Amanda White from Rangahau Matauranga o Aotearoa, the New Zealand Council for Educational Research, and Louise Gorst from Te Wānanga Aronui o Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland University of Technology, and a doctoral student of teacher leadership at Waipapa Taumata Rau, the University of Auckland. I bid you all a very warm welcome to our panellists in today's webinar, and thank you for sharing your time and experiences with us today. For our audience members, if any questions arise for you during the presentation that you would like to ask the panellists, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and they will respond to them at the end of their presentation. You can also use the chat function throughout the presentation to connect with each other and with the panellists. And after the seminar, a recording will be available on our Early Childhood Seminar Series YouTube channel. I will now pass over to Associate Professor Maria Cooper to begin the discussion. Kia ora, Maria.
Kia ora, Justine. Thank you for that. It is a real privilege for us to be part of the seminar series this year and part of the opening one too. And we know of the good work that you do, Justine, behind the scenes to keep this running, and also our university. Tano whalawa, kia ora koutou. I am Maria Cooper. I'm an Associate Professor of Early Childhood Education at the University of Auckland, and it's also the place where I did my teaching qualification, my Master's and my PhD. So reflective of my Samoan and Slovak heritage, I teach and research in the areas of early childhood leadership, pedagogy and curriculum from both Western and Pacific perspectives. At this point in my career, I guess I've written a lot, primarily for my role as an academic, but I remain committed to writing for the benefit of the early childhood education sector and beyond. What you'll see in this presentation is that the four of us are at very different points in our writing careers. Some of us have had many years of writing practice, and I say practice because I'm still learning to write well. And others of us are just starting that journey, still within their PhD project, and learning to write for different audiences. And I think that's quite key to understanding the writing process. It is a form of communication. Our use of the term knowledge mobilisation is intentional, but we take a cautious approach to this term because it's a phrase that many institutions like ours are using to describe an expectation of academics' work. We think, as a panel, it means different things to different people. So what do we mean by this term? Rather than suggesting that writing and knowledge mobilisation is a linear process, we're talking about knowledge engagement. So for us, this is the idea of engaging with strands of knowledge or ideas that resonate with people and can make a difference to ECE thinking, practice, and even policy. We refer to strands of knowledge to draw on the metaphor of the harakeke and the woven mat of te whāreke, which many of us are familiar with, and the idea behind it of acknowledging many contributions. In the literature, Levin argues that research doesn't just impact practice, it informs it through relationships. And so, like Levin, we see knowledge mobilisation through publishing as a social process. sharing ideas that may resonate with others and change the way we think about and approach our work with children or policymakers. So how did we get started with writing? Or how does one get started? Well, writing starts with one idea, one that is powerful enough to stimulate interest. Ask yourself, is it original? Is it a fresh perspective on a taken for granted practice? Is it something that surprises you? If it's useful to you in your place, could it be useful to someone else in another place? We also think that questions around ethics and integrity are important when thinking about knowledge mobilisations. We should always ask ourselves, am I the right one to share this? Who co-created this knowledge with me? On that note, when we think about how we know what we know, often that knowledge has been co-created with participants, with teams, families, and so on. And it can also be highly personal and even tapu or sacred, so not for publication. So we want to move away from thinking of knowledge mobilization as merely transferring data from research to practice, and more towards the idea of engagement with ideas that flow and inform. And we think that this for us is a more respectful way of thinking about what, and importantly, who we are often writing about. So why publish? One reason is for resonance and action. As a panel, we see writing as a professional contribution to the sector, well beyond a line on our CV. While some of us may feel institutional pressures to publish, and maintaining publications is important to some, keeping communities in mind can be helpful for who and why we are writing. We also publish to invite take-up of new ideas. For us, it shouldn't just be about being seen as an author. It's also about inviting others to pick up the ideas and think about them in relation to their own practice. We also see publishing as an important tool for advocacy, something that our sector is known for and used to and has been for a very long time. In this way, writing becomes a political act, a call for action. And when we write about the complexity of our work, we're advocating for children, families, teachers, the sector. We're also reminding broader communities that the work we do is thoughtful, intellectual, and important. We also need to think about reach and access. Give some consideration to ideas that will connect and land somewhere. These are the ideas that will make a difference. But for this to happen, ideas need to be written in a way that is accessible, not jargon heavy and dense. Think about who should have these ideas, who really needs them, and will our writing reach the teachers and centres in remote areas, in our own country contexts if we're from overseas? What about the children in whānau, the policymakers? Think about all of those intended audiences. We also think that good writing should open, not close dialogues. Even a poorly worded title can mean the dialogue never gets off the ground. So think about punchy titles, even starting with that, and providing enough detail around a central idea and offering reflections or questions. All of this should encourage your readers to carry the ideas into a conversation with others, a process that can continue well after the article is read. So when and where did I start my own writing journey? I think this would resonate with many. It was a childhood curiosity for me. As a child, I had a lot of whys. Why are we here? How do we know who we are? What's our purpose in life? I do remember asking a lot of those questions. So being curious with knowledge and ideas. And I realize that the same curiosity about life is what fuels my research and interest in writing for different groups. As a teacher of young children, I enjoyed this role so much, and this passion was reflected in a practitioner paper I wrote in the first year's journal called Learning from Toddlers. My goal back then was not to be seen as an author, but to share my joy of being with toddlers and to communicate that they had taught me to be a better observer and listener. And to this day, I still see children as ultimate researchers, testing theories, failing, and then trying again. Then after a few years of teaching, I felt like I needed more intellectual stretch. So I sought out postgraduate study while teaching, where academic writing became my new challenge. So my focus shifted from noticing something about the children to thinking about practice more analytically and learning ways to retell that story for broader benefit. This period of postgraduate study also allowed me to see the tension between jargon-heavy and dense writing and expecting teachers to sit with ideas they couldn't access. So I learned and am still learning how to turn the big, dense and abstract ideas into an accessible language that others can read and understand. In relation to what's worked well for me, like many others, I used to think writing was about cramming a whole lot of ideas into the one paper. But through practice, experience, and the wisdom of my writing mentors, I've shifted to focusing on one main idea or argument per paper and spending my time giving the ideas legs and wings. For me, it's about starting with a small idea, an abstract, a paragraph, even a sentence to clarify the essence of my idea and building from there. What has also worked well is seeking out models and feedback, writing models and feedback. I used to see writing as an activity done individually and in isolation, and that's often what you see. We see that at our institution, but it's not often reflective of the process. I agree with Levin that it is a social activity, not a solo one. So I talk to people about my ideas, even if they don't want to hear them. I read what others have written around the idea and I build on their ideas as a way to join the broader conversation. And I look for journals that have started conversations related to this idea. I also look to my writing models, and these include generous colleagues who are in their own right expert writers. This includes my research supervisors. I've had to learn in that process not to be afraid of sharing drafts with others because it's the feedback that helps ideas take form to then be able to be shared with others. For integrity, I also include the good, the bad, and the ugly, what I call the realities of practice or the process. If we only write about the perfect days or the seamless process, our writing can feel inauthentic to a discerning eye. So by including reflection about the challenges and tensions, we can give our writing more authenticity and convey the message that what we're writing about is more complex than just a nice story. So in terms of what I've learned over the years of writing, I've learned that I should write not merely to be an author, but to communicate and connect. For me, it's very much about ngā hononga relationships. Writing also gives me a tool to move people in some way, to stimulate conversations, and if what I've written is useful to someone to shift thinking, then it's done its job. I've also learned to separate substance from how the ideas are presented. In the past, I've spent a whole day perfecting the look of a couple of paragraphs, only to get rid of them after constructive feedback. And my advice here would be to focus on, leave the focusing on the grammar until later in the process. The substance is what matters first. And just remember, you can't polish a blank page. And then moving forward to today, now as a journal editor of the first year's journal, I've shifted from learning to write my own stories to supporting others to write. In 2024, I interviewed long-standing early childhood advocate Anne Hatherley for her insights on leadership in the sector and relevance for those who care for infants and toddlers. I turned this interview into a short paper in the journal to inspire other leaders. And I want to end my talk with a quote about Anne spending hours with kayako teachers, helping them shape their stories of practice into publishable articles. Anne said, "I saw this as a way of giving back to the sector for all it had given me and promoting leadership." Writing encourages the clarification of thoughts, which is beneficial for both advocacy and leadership, especially when it integrates localized experience with a broad worldview and research. And in response to that quote, I wrote, Anne's comments highlight the value of good mentorship in supporting kayako to make meaningful contributions beyond the early childhood setting. So I hope that you will take something from this webinar and after listening to all the speakers that is useful to your own writing careers. I now step back and invite Raella to come forward with her story. Kia ora.
Ora, Maria, thank you so much for that invitation and for the really lovely groundwork and discussion of your own writing career. I found I got quite a lot out of that myself. I'll just introduce myself formally. Ko kahura na ki tōku maunga, ko kahura na ki tōku marae, ko naruroro tōku awa, ko te hapuku tōku tipuna, ko nai te rangi koanaki tōku hapu, ko nā te kahununu tōku iwi, ko Raella tōku ingoa. My name is Raella. I'm from the University of Waikato, Te Whare Wānanga o Waikato in the Division of Education. And it's wonderful to be here today and talk about something that I am passionate about, which is writing. And for many of the same reasons that Maria is. There is something wonderful about, and I have to say painful, about trying to distill a thought or an idea or a research process into a paper and being able to focus on that. What I wanted to focus on today was the concept of finding the space to write. I am an early career researcher. I had teaching fellow work for a while at the University of Waikato before securing a permanent job, but I'm only about 3 years in terms of my formal academic career. And finding the space to write has been a ongoing topic of discussion with basically myself since I started working full time. When I began to, probably the first serious writing I did was my master's, which was some time ago now. I think it was like 2011 or something. And then I had a really big gap until I came back and did my PhD. And between the PhD and now, I've worked on different research projects and written different research document reports and articles, and we just finished a book last year that came out of some of those research projects, and it's been quite a dramatic learning journey. The first article I ever had published was in Early Childhood Folio, so it makes me very happy that I'm now co-editing that. That was under Linda Mitchell, who was also my chief supervisor for my PhD, and that was an article to do with my master's. And it was painful. It was so incredibly painful. I think it went through like 3 drafts. And she kept sending it back and saying, well, you need this, you've missed this. And I was quite discouraged at the time because that was new. By the time I got to the end of my PhD, she had given me so much feedback on so many things. I'd kind of become a bit immune to it. It was like, well, yes, send me the feedback, I'll fix it. And those were 2 very marked changes between, they're about a decade apart, I think I suppose about 8 years apart, that I did these 2 qualifications, the 2 really big pieces of writing to date before I began my academic work. And seeing the way that I changed my response to feedback was actually really helpful for me. It stopped being something I was afraid of, which was definitely the case at the master's level, and it started to become something I embraced quite a lot more because I realized it would make me better. It would hone my work. That said, there was a point, I think must have been about 6 or 7 months into my PhD journey, where Linda and my other supervisor, the very wonderful Margaret Carr, sat down in one of our meetings. They said, "You need to send us some writing. Write something, send it to us. We talk a lot about theorizing. Write something down." And I said, "Well, you try sending writing to you too. That's incredibly intimidating." And and then Linda gave me one of the big pieces of advice that I've remembered throughout my entire career, my very short career, but nonetheless remember very regularly. And she said, "Don't agonize." She said, "I see you do that. You're wanting it to be perfect. You can change anything that's on the page. Don't agonize." And that has been a repeated theme she has continued to say to me until, well, I don't actually think she'll stop because she can tell when I've got my agonizing face on, and she will remind me that I need to let that go. Because as Maria said, you can change anything once it's out, but you can't edit anything that isn't there. And that was really helpful to me. It helped me get out of my head a bit. And that was one of the first examples I had of learning to make space for writing. I needed to actually get out of my own way. I needed to stop wanting it to be perfect. I just needed to write something, anything, as it turned out. And then I could look at it, and even if it was bad, I would feel encouraged, like, well, I can write better than that. Let's give it another go. And I would, and frankly would have to give it another go. My supervisors made that quite clear. But it would get better. And then I got a bit more confident. And by the end of my PhD, I remember I had to revise a couple of things, and I went back and I looked at things that I'd written much earlier in the PhD journey and thought, oh, I think I could write way better than that. I think I should actually revise that whole chapter now that I'm looking at it. I can see where there are some flaws, and that was when I was told that a good PhD was a finished PhD, and we would not be revising the whole chapter, and I would just do what I needed to, and we would submit and move on with our lives. And that was appreciated too. That was part of the journey for a PhD student. Probably the big challenge that I have now in an early academic space is finding time to write. And I was meeting with my line manager about this. And she, like some of the other senior academics in my organisation, I have made it a point of talking to different people about how they find time to write. Because what was happening for a while is I would show up to work, I would open my emails thinking I would clear those and then get on with my day. And then 3 hours later, I would still be doing emails because more would come in, and I would get caught up administrating my job rather than actually doing the thing which I considered to be my core work, which was either teaching or writing. And it took a little while to realize I was actually going to have to carve out the space. And my line manager said to me, when I was telling her about this challenge, if someone came and they wanted to schedule a meeting during your teaching time, during the time you're face to face with students, would you let them do it? And I said, absolutely not. And she said, well, you need to be that firm with your writing. Wherever and however you're carving out a space, that time needs to be sacred. You need to protect that the way you would a teaching space. And that kind of landed for me, and I realized that my writing had become incredibly flexible. I was basically, if anyone needed a meeting, if they needed something done, I would hop in there and do it, and and my writing would not happen. And so over time, I've learned to develop these regular writing habits, and it depends on what season I'm in. In semester A, which is always my heavy semester, I aim for 30 minutes a day. That may not sound much, but that's better than 0 minutes a day. And if I'm very targeted, which I usually am, I usually have one very small goal to complete across a particular project or piece that I'm working on. That adds up over time. And it means by the end of a semester, I have made progress on writing. I can usually get a draft together, even if it's not perfect. As the first point here notes, I've learned to foreground writing as my primary job. This is the thing that gives me life as an academic. And there was a period where I wasn't writing, particularly last year, before I learnt how to do more to make space. That I was struggling quite a bit. I felt like I'd drifted away from myself. And as I reflected, I realized it was because I'd stopped writing. And it's not just the stress of it, because there are expectations, organizational expectations that their academic staff will write and publish. There was that too, but it was more the fact that I actually enjoy writing. It's like coming back to myself. And the fact that I wasn't doing it made me feel impoverished. So when I began to prioritize writing, when I began to move workflows and structures around this, around and protect core writing time, when I understood the conditions I needed to write, then I began to actually get the space I needed. And I began to feel better, because even if it was just for 30 minutes, every day I would write something. And that was coming back to who I was. Now, am I writing things that will bring enlightenment to entire mankind? No. But I'm writing things that are important to me, things that honor the data of children in kaiako, things that tell stories that are meaningful. And this is what I mean by coming back to myself. It's a part of that weight I was feeling, was that I hadn't written these stories that I said I would write. I say stories because I like stories, but I'm talking about articles or other publications. And then when I began to work with Waikato started a new system of academic mentors at the end of last year. And as I began to work with my academic mentor, she talked about building a comprehensive publishing plan, laying out the data that you have, planning. It's not super scripted, but it's the idea of seeing the end from the beginning. Here's the things that I can work on. And if I'm really stuck on one, maybe I should go work on another for a little while and give myself a little rest. All of these things have helped me to settle into a writing self, to embrace that persona of myself as a writer, but importantly, to make sure I'm giving it the space I need. Yes, that's all I'd like to say. Kia ora.
I'll follow on from you, Raella. Kia ora tātou, ko Amanda White toka ingoa. I'm a karangaho researcher at NZ-CER, which is the New Zealand Council for Educational Research here in Wellington. We're an independent research and development organisation. But I'm also a graduate of the University of Auckland, where I completed my PhD in the area of early childhood languages and literacies at the Faculty of Education and Social Work, or what was then. I don't know if it's still called that, actually. And I just want to acknowledge here that my PhD supervisors were absolutely critical in shaping my writing journey, Professors Helen Hedges and Janet Gaffney. And I'm going to mention them more when I tell a bit more about my story. But I'm also currently co-editor of Early Childhood Folio with Raella, and I think all the experiences I've had learning to be a writer have led to being able to support others in their writing journeys as well. So before talking about this slide, I'm just going to explain a little bit about my writing journey and where I started. And I think probably this was when I was a practitioner. My background is a speech and language therapist, and I worked in that field for over 20 years in education. And I remember clearly one particular job I had in East London for an organisation called Sure Start, where part of my role was to write and develop a series of guides for parents and teachers on ways to support children's oral language through play. And they ended up being published as a series of colourful cards in different languages like Bengali, Arabic, English, various different languages. But just the buzz that it felt to see something that I'd written be published and that we could share it with other people. So I really, listening to what Maria and Raella said about, the impact and that it's the purpose of service and sharing those ideas and information with others, which is a big reason for me in terms of writing. My academic writing career began when I was a university student, first as an undergrad, and then later when I came back to do my PhD, and that was when I had my first experience alongside my supervisors in publishing my first journal article. And I also published for Folio and an international journal, so that was really exciting as well. And also, while I was doing my PhD, I had experience writing and publishing in the research to practice space for the Education Hub. And this was a different kind of writing. It involved writing a series of research briefs for early childhood teachers and parents on the subject of oral languages and literacies. And then later, I wrote the content for an online early literacies course. And that was a cool experience working alongside the learning design and technology team at the Education Hub and seeing how they pieced the content together with the visuals to become an online course. And currently in my role at NZCER, we publish a broad range of written work, including literature reviews, research reports, summaries for the Ministry of Education that might influence curriculum or policy. And the most recent thing I've written was a framework for a reading comprehension assessment. And we also manage the TLRI fund, which is sadly coming to an end, but that has also involved our team reviewing academic writing in the reports that are produced. So I guess it's amazing the many different places that your writing can take you during your career, and I still feel it just at the beginning of my writing career. So I'm going to turn to the slide now just to talk about some key lessons I've learned about writing and publishing, and I've picked three things. Firstly, do your research into quality and style. Secondly, seek opportunities to write and publish. And thirdly, develop your resources to keep on writing and keep on enjoying it. So the first little box there, do your research into quality and style. I think of learning to write as like learning a craft that has a function or a purpose, a form, but it also has a huge creative element. And I think in learning to write about academic writing for journals, a good place for me to start was to read widely and to read critically. And that was encouraged by my supervisors, not only to establish what my topic and my research questions were going to be, but it also helped me to learn a lot about the literature in my field of study and to identify good or maybe not so good examples of quality, but also writing styles that I felt really drawn to. And through that, I found a few authors that I became a fangirl of, and I kept coming back to them in terms of their content and style, and it shaped how I wanted to write because I tried to do some of the things that they did. And that got me tuned into thinking critically also about what makes a piece of writing interesting and accessible for its particular intended audience. Also got me delving into journals, and I soon found ones that felt they were like my neighborhood in terms of content and style. And Folio was one of those because I really enjoy that research practitioner focus. And discovered that many journals have guidelines in terms of the quality and style, but also practicing being a peer reviewer for journals, for a couple of journals, also helped me hone my skills in understanding quality. So these were all things that were a starting point for me to develop my own style and improve upon my quality of writing. Secondly, I also think it's a good idea to stay open to opportunities to practice writing for a range of different purposes. And as Maria and Raella have said, I think one of the best ways to learn about that process is through writing with others. And I was fortunate to co-write a journal article with my supervisors during my PhD, and we've also just finished writing a book chapter together. And I learned so much from that experience, not just where to start, how to think of a title, and how to hone what we're going to write about, how to divide up the portions of writing and then bring them together with an argument that is seamlessly, well, that's what we're aiming for, to be seamlessly woven through. It really is an art and it's not always linear. And learning from really expert writers like that about how sometimes you might jump into the middle. You might not go beginning to end, but it's like sort of sewing pieces together. And I learnt a lot through that. And I've also written with fellow PhD students, my colleagues at NZ-CER, and one of my early childhood folio papers was with a teacher who was a participant in my study. So we wrote that together. I think overall, though, no matter what you write, it's about being clear on your purpose and being clear on your audience in terms of the language and content and the format that you choose. Your style and content will be yours, but they will vary depending on who you're writing for and what the purpose and impact that you want to make. So it's important to explore different genres like journal articles. It could be blogs or different kinds of reports or resources if you're a kayako working on the ground. And if you're not sure what to write about, create opportunities by talking to people. What are hot topics in your field? What are areas of need? What are gaps in the literature that you've noticed that you can contribute to? And my third point is that I've found useful to get started in terms of writing and publishing is developing resources that work for you and make it sustainable and enjoyable. So again, one of the best resources or supports here for me has been other people. Finding critical friends to share your writing with who will give you honest feedback, whether it's your supervisors, colleagues, or student group, and developing a thick skin because you will get lots of feedback, like Raella said, and you just have to get used to that process of iteration and, shaping it up, polishing it, and trying again. And in our PhD student group with Helen, we used to discuss and critique different aspects of writing. And one practical resource I found really useful here was the blog by Pat Thompson called Patter. And we used to sometimes discuss a particular tip that helped to explain or improve an aspect of academic writing. I've just been looking at her one on writing an abstract, and I still follow that blog today because there's so much in there. As well as sustaining writing, personally, it's important to me to enjoy writing, and I've tried to find ways to increase the enjoyment, which can be difficult when procrastination sets in, as many of us will know. And another helpful resource here while I was doing my PhD was attending a couple of webinars with Helen Sword. She specifically talks about the pleasure of writing, and she has lots of great ideas and practical tools on her website as well. And a last resource that I enjoyed using and helped me enjoy writing is a software tool called Scrivener. I think some of you may have heard about this, but it was recommended to me by a friend who's a novelist. So it's quite useful for big pieces of writing, but I've used it both for my PhD and for writing articles. And it's a bit like a color-coded binder system for organizing longer pieces of writing. And you can move chunks around, you can change colors. And it was a game changer for me because I loved the way that I could organize sections using color and layout in that way. It just made the whole process less boring and more aesthetically pleasing, perhaps. And I've used it quite a bit, as I say. So they're just a few tips from me, and I wish everyone well for their writing and publishing journeys. Kia ora.
All right. Been really interesting hearing the thoughts and tips and knowledge from our first three panelists. And I'm now going to speak my name's Louise Gorst, and I'm a lecturer at Auckland University of Technology. And I'm going to speak on behalf of an emerging researcher, and I'm currently completing my PhD on teacher leadership and how teachers, when they make curriculum decisions, how they come together and how they draw on their knowledge and interests together as in collaborative ways. So where did I start my writing journey? My writing journey began with my first publication, the same as Maria, which was with the First Years Journal. And this is the University of Auckland's Infants and Toddlers Journal. And the title of this piece was Leadership Development as a Bus Journey. This was a really positive first experience because I was able to draw on my knowledge and experiences and my values and beliefs of what leadership meant to me from those experiences, from being a teacher, leader, mentor, and leadership roles as well too. So this very first publication was pivotal in my writing journey. I wrote this piece while I was working on my master's degree, and writing this piece cemented my researcher positionality and my identity, which I think was the beginning of, building some confidence in who I am as a researcher and a writer. It also allowed me to reflect on what I have to offer in relation to my developing professional knowledge and understanding as a beginning researcher. It gave me the opportunity to reflect on these developing knowledge, values, and experiences. It's also worth noting that I was invited and encouraged to contribute to this journal by my master's and now one of my PhD supervisors, Associate Professor Maria Cooper, who supported me in writing this first publication. And I too resonate with Amanda and Raella, who talked about receiving feedback can be quite confronting. And I know Maria talked about having a rhino back, you have to be tough skin. But what I've learned over time is that receiving the feedback, once you open it up, the first time you read it, you see all these comments and you're feeling a little bit, I don't want to look at it anymore. But then once you actually open the comments, a lot of the feedback is extending on your ideas, giving you some suggestions to make your written work richer, stronger, so that that you're getting your point across. So I think the feedback is really important about that. So at the same time, I had begun the initial journey of my research and writing, from writing this very first piece. And it's something that I'm really proud of, and I use it today in my role as a lecturer and provider, as a reading for student teachers, to reflect on how they view leadership and drawing on what their beliefs and values are as well, because I think that reflection is really important for teachers, practitioners, but also emerging researchers and academics. So from here, I've published a few articles from my master's degree and my ongoing PhD developments. Some of these opportunities have included my involvement in university team research projects and also taking on research assistant roles. These research engagements and opportunities have influenced my writing journey by enabling me to develop new knowledge, skills, and research experiences that I've shared with and learned alongside others. These experiences, I think, have been pivotal in that next stage of my journey. So just moving to the next slide now, what has worked well for me? So firstly, co-authoring and working with others. As an emerging researcher, it is essential to have supportive, experienced researchers and academics to guide your early learning journey. I've had the privilege of working with others who have unique knowledge and expertise, which has strengthened my research writing and collaborations. Secondly, being the first author, I've only done this once, but the value of this type of collaboration enabled reciprocal support between the three authors that I was writing with. But being the lead author meant that I had to step up. And this was where I learned a lot by taking on this leadership responsibility. This experience was highly beneficial, and I intend to publish more first author publications in the future, and also once I complete my PhD. But I think it's the important part is the collaboration, but what I want to reiterate here was being put in the leadership role and being first author. I really had to step up and consider my role with that. So thirdly, being involved with a journal editorial team, and I think we've all talked about this afternoon. I have been involved in the journal editorial team for the first Jazz Journal with the University of Auckland. This was where I took on roles such as being a peer reviewer, proofreader, lead editor, and also writing an editorial. I learned a great deal of valuable knowledge and experience about the processes of putting together a journal publication with the support of the team of experienced researchers and publishers. So what have I learned from these experiences? Several areas have been influential in developing my knowledge and skills. Mobilising knowledge as a PhD student supports research and writing throughout the PhD journey. Perhaps writing about the various theses chapters, such as the literature review, methods and methodology, findings and discussions, helps to mobilise your research with others and potentially makes lasting connections with other researchers, which is invaluable. Knowing the journal is also really important. So when writing or seeking a suitable journal, it is important to understand the scope and the audience of the journal, who your readers are, what their roles are, and how your contributions might add to and support the growing research and literature in your research area. Collaborating with others offers many rich learning experiences. As an emerging researcher, this is where I gained new knowledge of different perspectives and approaches, including new and interesting literature, theory, methods, and methodologies, not to mention the unique and intriguing ideas of other researchers. Another aspect of collaborating with others enables emerging researchers to gain support and guidance, as well as to establish relationships through sharing collective knowledge. I've recently co-authored a chapter in a book with my second supervisor, Emeritus Professor Helen Hedges, and an international researcher from Greece. Again, these collaborations also form influential networks and relationships. And lastly, it is important to talk to others about your research, your publication intentions, and implementation plans. This collaborative networking is vital. The value of taking opportunities when they come along, even if you're unsure whether you have the time or whether you think you are capable or not. I believe this is especially important for emerging researchers. Just do it. There's a reason why that person has asked you. They see you as capable. The value of seeking opportunities to put your research out there. Collaborate with others. Find the journals that speak to you and your research. Subscribe to them and read them so you can become familiar with them. And it is always good to have a writing goal or several. I think that's really important as well. Raella, you shared something about that, about having, I like that idea of having a few on the go, so that if you are struggling with one, then shift to the next one. And for those of you who are considering or new to writing for publication, I encourage you to be open, willing to share and learn, and trusting yourself and others. And to also know that you have something worthy and important to share. Ngā mihi nui. Thanks for listening to my contribution as part of this inspiring and motivating panel discussion.
Kia ora, Louise. Thank you, colleagues. I'm just showing you the reference slides that related to my talk in case anyone's interested in those references. And also land on this slide here, which just lists some of the New Zealand ECE specific journals that people can look up online. So the two that we've mentioned in this presentation, because we are co-editors of those journals, first one is the first year's Ngā Tau Tuatahi New Zealand Journal of Infant and Toddler Education. and there's an email there if you're interested in asking a question, but I would recommend you look on the website, and the same for the Early Childhood Folio that Raella and Amanda are co-editors of. Both journals have their own author guidelines, and that's a good place to start too, for just finding out what those journals are looking for, what kinds of submissions, and also on the website for any support that the journal might offer new writers. And I'll come to the question that we have in the Q&A shortly, because it partly responds to that. But I also want to mention there are other journals that target practitioners in particular, projects that you've engaged in your own workspaces on inquiry. We know that some of those projects can be really in depth, and there's a lot of insight that others can be inspired by. So I'd love to see more writing from practitioners, even seeking the support of someone who's a good writer or an established writer. And New Zealand Tertiary College's He Kupu and the New Zealand International Research and ECE Journal. Those are just the local journals that come to mind that seek submissions about early childhood education. There are, of course, ones broader than ECE that you could write for. And also Amanda mentioned the Education Hub as a platform for shorter pieces that are easy for teachers to pick up and really think about some ideas, summary pieces that teachers can read in a lunchtime, and I would hope to stimulate discussions amongst themselves about those ideas and what they mean for their practice. So you've heard from us. We are keen to hear from you now. We've got a few minutes for questions, and there is one from Andrew. 3 comments from Andrew. Thank you, Andrew, in the Q&A, but it is a really important question, and it's about our recommendations across the panel for any events, symposia, conferences, conventions and such that provide support for anyone wanting to write in the context of ECE. Or about the writing process itself. So I think what we'll do is I'll share an idea and then just look to the panel to add to that idea, so you get a few ideas. One local conference that is very open to hearing from practitioners is our NZARI. This is not ECE specific, it is broader than that across the education sector, but it's the New Zealand Association for Research and Education, and they have a yearly conference that has a whole lot of interest groups as well around different areas that you might be interested in. For example, there is an ECE SIG that I would recommend practitioners who are interested and other academics and postgraduate students look at online. The ECE SIG, it's often convened by a team of ECE people, and we get together once a year, share ideas, be inspired by one another, and it's at those places that you can maybe someone shares your interest in an area and you know of some of their work or their project, and you'd be interested to write something with them. You don't have to be aiming for a big, dense publication. It can be something in one of these practitioner journals as a starting point, or even for an online blog. And so that's one idea, the NZARI conference that's held yearly in different cities around the country. This year it happened to be in Auckland, which was great for people in Auckland. So I'll open to the panel if they've got other recommendations.
Kia ora, yes. I know that quite a few of the institutions have local conferences. I was invited to one at Toiopomai in the Bay of Plenty last year. And the great thing about local conferences, it was a practitioner-based conference. It's a great place to have conversations. And if you're new to research and presenting, it's a little bit friendlier. as a way of joining conversations and getting to know other people. Waikato, shameless plug, has the Early Years Research Conference coming up in July this year. And attendance at these is often either free or very low cost. So you don't quite have the big fees of Inzari. So if you're looking to join conversations and meet other researchers, local conferences like that can be a really good way to get into it. I don't know if there's anyone from Otago here, but Otago runs a practitioner conference as well. I'm not quite sure where you're placed in the country, but I would suggest having a look at some of those venues. Often the Polytechs or Wintechs will run things like that as well, and they can be a really great way to get into that. Kia ora.
Thank you, Raella.
I'm also thinking about in my first year, I think my first experience of presenting and writing the presentation was at symposia held within the Faculty of Education and Social Work. I can't remember if it was just for doctoral students or for masters as well, but that was a really safe, supportive way to start. And to discuss your work with other students. And also within our whānau PhD group with Helen, we had a writing retreat. It's more of an event, I suppose, this one, where we went away for a couple of days and we just, the focus was on writing as much as we can, but it was nice to go somewhere where we had didn't have to worry about cooking meals, and we could talk to one another about what we'd written, what we were focusing on, what our writing goal was for that particular retreat. And I think I went on a couple of those, and that was really, really useful too. They're much more smaller things, but I found them really good places to start.
Thank you. Louise, any ideas?
I'm the same with Inzari. I've presented there on 2 occasions. But what I found really helpful was practicing beforehand with PhD peers as part of our whānau group. I found that really helpful. Just having a few tweaks or having ideas, sharing the PowerPoint presentation with your supervisors if they're willing to look at, that's really helpful as well too. So the practice builds your confidence. Yeah.
Thank you, Louise. Yeah, I think interest groups too can be really useful. So looking online for anything that brings people with a common interest together, and they can be good spaces for sparking conversations and ideas for writing. I'm also thinking about early childhood centres, services, kindergartens who have relationships with people who are involved in research. And they can be, a contact to bring in maybe for a staff meeting to talk about the writing process, to talk about where you might start, even what you might write about if you're new to this. So, many of us started writing early on, but we also wrote as teachers because we enjoy writing. So think about that. Think about who might support your writing process if you want to embark on one, who might be a reader of your writing, who could give you feedback, someone you trust, hopefully. Because as Raella said, the feedback can be, you need thick skin, right? But it's all in the spirit of supporting your work and ensuring that you can communicate to everyone who needs these ideas and who would like them. So that's where the feedback is often coming from. And trying writing for a practitioner journal, putting something in and getting maybe some editor's feedback as a starting point, even your idea, and how you might go about it. That can be another useful avenue for those new to writing. Yeah. I think we've shared what we wanted to share today, and thank you all for the opportunity. We hope to see many more writers from you, from this group in the sector and also beyond the sector. Happy to hear from you too. Kia ora.
Ora Maria, and thank you Maria, Raella, Amanda and Louise for your sharing today. Your presentation is a great resource to support early childhood teachers, postgrad students and any other new writers who are wanting to turn their research or inquiry projects into publications for the wider education community. So ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. I suspect this is going to be a well-shared presentation that people will want to revisit and share with others. So we're very appreciative of your time and your sharing of your research experience and wisdom in this space. To our early childhood seminar series audience, if you wish to share or revisit this presentation, please do check out the Early Childhood Seminar Series YouTube channel. The recording of this seminar will be available in the next couple of days. And we look forward to seeing you all back for our next seminar. So keep an eye on your inbox for the flyer and registration information. Thank you again for joining us today. We'll close with karakia. Me enoi tātou. Kia tau te rangi Mārie o te rangi i tu iho nei, o papatuanuku i te akoto nei, o te tai ao i awhi nei, ki runga i a tātou. Tihei, mauri ora. May the peace of the sky above, of the earth below, of the all-embracing universe rest upon us all. Behold, it is life. Take good care, everyone. Ka kite anō.